There are pages in human history that official science prefers to turn as quickly as possible. Pages where dry historical facts, meticulously documented by eyewitnesses, notaries, and magistrates, look terrifyingly worse than any fictional horror. We are used to thinking of the past as a clear chronicle of wars, alliances, discoveries, and plagues. We know how to fight the Black Death, we understand the nature of cholera, and we can explain medieval cruelty through geopolitics or religious fanaticism. But what do you do when the human body, for no apparent reason, turns into its own executioner? What do you do when a person's consciousness remains trapped inside their physical shell, begging for mercy while their arms and legs obey a foreign, invisible, and merciless will? The summer of 1518, the Holy Roman Empire, the prosperous city of Strasbourg. A suffocating, sticky heat hangs over the streets. The air smells of dust, sewage, and cheap sour wine. On one completely ordinary July day, a woman steps out onto the narrow cobblestone street. Her name is Frau Troffea. She doesn't scream, she doesn't beg for help, she doesn't perform any religious rituals. She simply begins to dance. This day went down in history as the beginning of one of the most enigmatic, horrifying, and still unexplained phenomena: the dancing plague. An event that claimed hundreds of lives turned a thriving European city into a grand, mad, open-air theater of death and left scientists of the following centuries helplessly shaking their heads. Was it a curse, a virus unknown to science, a mental parasite, or something that humanity is still unable to comprehend? To understand it, we must walk this path from the very beginning, step by step, to the beat of this lethal dance. It all began without thunder or lightning, without omens in the skies. Strasbourg chronicles record that between July 14th and July 20th, 1518, Frau Troffea left her home. Her husband, a modest artisan, tried to hold her back, but she did not respond to his words. Her gaze was fixed on the void, as if she saw something far beyond the dirty medieval walls. She stepped out into the square and began to move. This was not a dance of joy, nor was it festive merriment. Witnesses described her movements as convulsive, jerky, yet terrifyingly rhythmic. She spun, threw her arms forward, hopped, and stomped her feet on the sharp cobblestones. Hour by hour, the sun rose higher, scorching the city air. A crowd began to gather around Frau Troffea. At first, people laughed, thinking the woman had had too much ale or had lost her mind over family troubles. But the laughter quickly faded when evening came. The sun set below the horizon, plunging the city into darkness, but Frau Troffea did not stop. Her clothes were soaked with sweat, her breath turned into a raspy, wheezing cough, but her feet kept beating out the frantic rhythm. She danced all night. The next morning, her feet had turned into raw, bloody wounds. Her nails were broken against the stones, and white foam appeared on her lips. She was crying. Historians emphasize this detail. The woman was not in an ecstasy of bliss. She was weeping from pain and terror, begging onlookers to stop her. But the moment anyone grabbed her arms, her body would break into such violent convulsions that it became impossible to hold her. The forces moving her were unnaturally, monstrously powerful. On the third day, Frau Troffea collapsed from absolute exhaustion. Her exhausted husband and arriving monks loaded her onto a cart. They decided to take her to the shrine of Saint Vitus, located in the nearby Saverne Hills. It was believed that this saint held power over mental afflictions. There, her feet were locked in wooden stocks, she was sprinkled with holy water, and she was forced to pray. After a few days, the convulsions subsided, and the woman was able to return to normal life. But it was already too late. The mental virus, or whatever that force was, had already found new hosts. While Frau Troffea was praying in the mountains, the streets of Strasbourg began to fill with her followers. By the end of the first week, 34 people were dancing without stop on the city streets. Men, women, young girls, and respected fathers of families. They walked out of their shops, abandoned their plows, left infants in their cradles, and obeying an invisible call, joined this terrifying, silent dance. By the beginning of August 1518, Strasbourg was paralyzed. The number of dancers had reached over 100, and by the middle of the month, the crowd exceeded 400. Picture this scene: the center of a large, wealthy European city completely abandoned to the rule of madmen. Public life came to a standstill. Merchants closed their shops, courts suspended their sessions, artisans stopped producing goods. The entire city turned into one giant, living, twitching mass. The terrifying specificity of this phenomenon lay in its absolute autonomy. The dancers did not communicate with one another. There were no signs of a common conspiracy or a religious ritual among them. They sang no songs, shouted no slogans. Only two sounds could be heard: the endless, maddening thud of hundreds of feet against the cobblestones and the heavy, ragged, gasping breath of people on the brink of physical death. Medical historians who studied the Strasbourg archives note that under normal conditions, the human body is simply physically incapable of enduring such loads. Try jumping and running continuously for just 2 or 3 hours. Your heart will demand rest, your muscles will fill with lactic acid, and your brain will shut down from pain. The victims of the dancing plague danced for days on end. They did not eat, drink, or sleep. Their bodies worked in a state of extreme overload, as if someone had plugged them into an invisible source of colossal, destructive energy. And this source demanded payment. Soon, the city chronicles began to record the first deaths. At first, it was the elderly, whose hearts could not withstand the multi-day marathon in the 40-degree heat. They suffered heart attacks right in the middle of the square. A person would simply drop dead on their back, their eyes rolling away. But even as they lay on the ground in their final death throes, their legs would keep twitching convulsively, mimicking running in place. Then, the young began to die. The causes were strokes from dehydration, ruptured blood vessels, and the absolute, total exhaustion of the nervous system. At the peak of the epidemic, up to 15 people died daily in Strasbourg. City services could not keep up with removing the corpses. The dancers literally stumbled over the bodies of those who had died an hour ago, fell, got up covered in someone else's blood and filth, and continued their macabre dance. The atmosphere in the city became apocalyptic. People believed the end of the world had come. The stench of decomposing bodies in the heat mixed with the smell of sweat and excrement, for the miserable souls could not even stop to use the latrine. Strasbourg had become an earthly branch of hell, where living corpses performed their final endless dance of death. When the situation spiraled completely out of control, the city authorities, the Strasbourg magistrate, realized they had to act. The church declared it a punishment from God or the work of the devil, demanding mass prayers and repentance. However, the magistrate decided to take a scientific approach. They convened a council of the city's best doctors and the medical guild. The doctors examined the dancers, as much as it was possible to do with people constantly in motion, and handed down a verdict that seems peak madness to us today, but was the cutting edge of science for the 16th century. The medics rejected supernatural causes and declared that the dancing plague was a physiological disease. They called it hot blood. According to their theory, blood had boiled in the bodies of these people, causing overheating of the brain and convulsions. And if only they had stopped at the diagnosis. The doctors proposed a treatment, and this treatment became the most terrible, fatal mistake in the city's history. The medics stated, to cure hot blood, the patients must be given the opportunity to dance it out completely. According to their logic, as soon as the excess energy left the body, the disease would recede. The magistrate accepted the doctor's recommendations with terrifying compliance. Instead of isolating the sick, binding them, giving them water and rest, the authorities decided to optimize the process of the dance. They did everything they could to ensure the miserable souls did not stop for a single second. Building stages. In the center of the city, at the horse and meat markets, huge wooden stages were erected. The authorities reasoned that on smooth wood, it would be more convenient for the dancers to move, they would injure their feet less, and they would heal faster. Organized logistics. The magistrate hired special strong men, handlers. Their job was to walk among the dancers, catch those who began to fall from fatigue, hold them in a vertical position, and force them to keep moving. Musical accompaniment. Professional musicians were hired. Drummers, pipers, and lutists took shifts. The city squares were filled with loud, fast, rhythmic music, which was supposed to help the sick keep the tempo. This decision turned the tragedy into a grotesque nightmare. The sounds of cheerful folk tunes now mixed with the groans of the dying. The music acted on the crowd like gasoline poured onto a fire. Those city residents who had still been balancing on the edge of sanity up to that point, hearing this rhythm, lost the remnants of their will. They walked up to the stages, their faces contorted, and they jumped onto the wooden planks, joining the ranks of the doomed. The stages of Strasbourg turned into literal death factories. People wore their feet down to the bone. The wooden planks became slick with blood, serous fluid, and sweat. The musicians played without stopping. Drums thundered day and night, beating out the pulse of this collective madness. The magistrate had created the perfect conditions for the disease to consume as many people as possible. When it became glaringly obvious that the doctor's scientific method was leading to the complete annihilation of the population, the magistrate realized the full horror of their mistake. The death toll was rising exponentially. Music was immediately banned. The stages were torn down. A strict quarantine on any form of entertainment was declared in the city. All taverns, brothels, and gambling houses were shut down. Even talking loudly in the streets was forbidden. Anyone who attempted to make dancing movements was immediately seized and bound. But stopping the launched mechanism was no longer that simple. Bound people continued to thrash against their ropes, breaking their own joints and spines, trying to continue the dance. Then, the authorities of Strasbourg decided to return to where it all began: religion. In the public consciousness of the time, the idea was deeply rooted that Strasbourg had fallen victim to the curse of Saint Vitus. According to medieval beliefs, this Christian martyr, who lived in the 4th century, prayed to God before his death that everyone who celebrated his feast day would be protected from madness. However, in popular folklore, this myth transformed into its mirror image. It was believed that if anyone showed disrespect to the saint or committed a heavy sin, Saint Vitus would send down a punishment, an unending punishing dance that would suck the life right out of the sinner. The authorities made the decision to carry out a massive forced deportation of all surviving dancers. They were loaded into carts by the dozens. It was a terrifying procession, wagons filled with emaciated, blood-soaked people who, even while sitting or lying down, continued to twitch their limbs convulsively, moved toward the Saverne Hills to the very same grotto where Frau Trophea had been treated. There, in the damp cave, priests set up a literal conveyor belt for exorcism. The dancers, who no longer looked much like humans, unkempt, wasted away with wild, hollow eyes, were forced to sit before the altar. Special ritual red shoes, the soles of which were greased with holy oil, were put on their feet. Small crosses and images of Saint Vitus were placed in their hands. Monks continuously read prayers, fumigated the cave with incense, and sprinkled the dancers with cold spring water. Surprisingly, this method, based on deep psychological and religious impact, began to bear fruit. Perhaps the isolation from the city noise, the coolness of the cave, and the strict ritual managed to reset the broken psyche of the people. Or perhaps the force using their bodies had simply grown sated. By the end of September 1518, the epidemic receded. Most of the dancers had either died of exhaustion during transport or gradually came to their senses within the monastery walls. Strasbourg breathed a sigh of relief, but the city was changed forever. A dead, frightening silence reigned in the streets for a long time. People were afraid to make an extra sudden movement, afraid to tap a foot to the beat of a random sound. The fear that the killer rhythm would return paralyzed the minds of the survivors for years to come. Attempts to explain the unexplainable centuries passed. Modern rational eras replaced medieval superstitions. Historians and medical professionals repeatedly returned to the 1518 Strasbourg archives, trying to find a logical, materialistic explanation for what happened on those blood-soaked squares. Today, there are two primary scientific theories, each of which has its strengths, but neither is able to close this case once and for all. Theory number 1, ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire. This is the most popular and widely known theory among materialists. It states that the residents of Strasbourg fell victim to a massive chemical poisoning. In the Middle Ages, the staple food for the poor was rye bread. In rainy and damp years, and the summer of 1518 in Europe was exactly that, a damp spring followed by a sudden heat wave. A fungus called ergot, Claviceps purpurea, often parasitized rye stalks. Ergot contains a literal cocktail of dangerous psychoactive alkaloids, the main one being ergotamine. In essence, it is a natural chemical precursor to LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. When infected grain reached the mills, it was baked into bread, which was then consumed by hundreds of people. Ergot poisoning, ergotism, causes horrific symptoms, which in the Middle Ages were called St. Anthony's fire, hallucinations, intense visions, often of a religious or nightmarish nature. People saw angels, demons, and flames consuming the world, convulsions and spasms. The body's musculature begins to contract involuntarily. A person can be bent backward like a bow, their limbs twitching in a chaotic fashion. Gangrene. Ergotamine constricts blood vessels, causing tissue necrosis. Fingers and toes turn black and rot away. Why is this theory not perfect? Despite its apparent logic, the ergotism theory falls apart when approached from a physiological standpoint. Yes, ergot causes spasms and hallucinations, but these spasms are chaotic and painful. They cannot be synchronous and rhythmic over the span of weeks. Furthermore, with the severe vasoconstriction caused by the fungus, a person loses the ability to move normally. Their legs would simply fail within a few hours due to a lack of blood flow. The citizens of Strasbourg, however, demonstrated incredible endurance and coordination, executing complex dance steps for days on end. Additionally, ergotism does not explain why the disease spread gradually, from 1 person to 400 over a month, whereas with bread poisoning, everyone should have fallen ill simultaneously after a batch of infected flour went on sale. Theory number 2, mass psychogenic illness, collective hysteria. The second theory lies in the field of psychiatry. Its proponents, notably the prominent American medical historian John Waller, argue that the 1518 dancing plague was a classic case of mass psychosis. To understand how this is possible, one must immerse oneself in the context of the era. The beginning of the 16th century for the residents of Strasbourg was a time of absolute bleak despair. Several consecutive years of crop failures had plagued the city. The price of bread skyrocketed and famine began. Following the famine came disease, a wave of syphilis, leprosy, and the so-called English sweating sickness, a mysterious ailment that killed a person within hours, swept through the region. People lived in a state of permanent suffocating stress. They were certain that God was angry with them and that doom was near. In psychiatry, a phenomenon is known where, under extreme psychological pressure, the human mind switches on a defense mechanism, a dissociative state of trance. If this trance overlaps with a deep religious belief in a specific curse, in this case, the curse of St. Vitus, the brain of a vulnerable person can spontaneously trigger the symptoms of that curse. Frau Trofea, being perhaps a mentally unstable woman, succumbed to this trance first, and then the effect of psychological contagion took over. Other city residents who were in the same state of extreme nervous exhaustion, seeing her dance, subconsciously shut down their own volitional control and copied her behavior. It was a kind of collective suicide of the mind, an escape from an unbearable reality into a frantic, rhythmic trance. Why is this theory not perfect? Mass hysteria perfectly explains the social aspect of the epidemic, but it provides no answer to the central biological question. Where did emaciated, starving people, many of whom were on the brink of scurvy and anemia, get the physical energy to dance themselves to death? Psychosis can make a person believe they are a bird or a wolf, but it cannot turn ordinary muscles into a perpetual motion machine capable of working without sleep or food for days on end. Some other force, mental or physical, must have fueled these bodies from within. The Strasbourg incident of 1518 was not unique. If we look back at earlier chronicles, we find that Europe faced this terrifying anomaly over several centuries. Dancing epidemics, like an invisible underground fire, broke out here and there, leaving behind piles of corpses and the frightened entries of chroniclers. 1021, Dessau, Germany. A group of peasants threw a wild dance right during a Christmas church service. The priest cursed them, after which they could not stop for an entire year. According to the chronicles, they jumped knee-deep in mud and snow until the ground beneath their feet turned into a deep pit. Many died of heart failure, and the survivors suffered from an unceasing tremor of the limbs for the rest of their days. 1237, Erfurt. A large group of children, around 100, suddenly began dancing and jumping. They moved along the roads until they reached the neighboring town of Arnstadt. There, they all collapsed from exhaustion. Local residents transported them back to their parents, but most of the children died shortly thereafter, and those who survived remained blind or deaf for the rest of their lives. This story, by the way, formed the basis of the famous German legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. 1374, Aachen and the Rhine Valley. This was the largest outbreak prior to 1518. Thousands of people across modern-day Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands were gripped by a dancing mania. They gathered into huge, frenzied crowds, wandering from town to town, wildly contorting and screaming the names of unknown demons. They claimed that during the dance, they saw rivers of blood and the heavens opening up. Neither soldiers nor exorcists could stop them. If one carefully analyzes all these cases, a strange, chilling pattern begins to emerge. These outbreaks did not behave like ordinary diseases transmitted through airborne droplets or water. They behaved like an informational virus, like an ancient program dormant within the very structure of human existence, which activates under certain conditions unknown to us. Some esotericists and paranormal researchers put forward the hypothesis of the existence of so-called geopathogenic psychic resonances. They argue that at certain points on Earth, and the Rhine Valley is historically the epicenter of such outbreaks, the electromagnetic field or other radiation. The dancing plague of 1518 left a deep mark on European culture and art, though we often do not realize it. It was under the impression of these horrific events that the famous concept of the Dance of Death, Dance Macabre, was born. Medieval artists began mass-producing images of skeletons leading people of all classes, from beggars to kings and popes, in a frantic dance. This was not just a metaphor for equality before death. It was a literal reflection of the terror they witnessed in the squares of Strasbourg, where social status, wealth, and piety offered zero protection against the invisible puppeteer. This event also gave its name to a real medical diagnosis. Today, the term chorea, or St. Vitus's dance, refers to a group of neurological disorders characterized by quick, chaotic, involuntary muscle movements that resemble a dance. But modern chorea is a genetic condition or the consequence of severe infections, such as rheumatic fever. It affects individuals case by case and never, under any circumstances, balloons into a massive epidemic capable of seizing an entire city. We live in the 21st century. We have mapped the human genome, we launch rovers to Mars, and we create artificial intelligence. It seems to us that we are in total control of our minds and our bodies. We are confident that we are protected from the dark, irrational nightmares of the Middle Ages by the walls of our technological megacities and rational thinking. But is that really true? If the dancing plague was not poisoning and not just stress, but something deeper, a glitch in the very matrix of human consciousness, a mental parasite waiting for its hour, then what guarantee do we have that it won't return? Today, in the age of the internet and social media, information spreads at the speed of light. We regularly witness outbreaks of mass digital hysteria, where millions of people simultaneously begin performing strange, destructive actions, obeying yet another viral trend or challenge. We call them memes or internet fads. But if you look closer, The mechanisms of this phenomenon are frighteningly similar to what happened in Strasbourg. One person makes a movement, millions repeat it, turning off their critical thinking. What if the killer rhythm never disappeared? What if it simply changed its form, transforming from the clatter of wooden shoes on a medieval cobblestone street into digital code broadcasted through the screens of our smartphones? It waits until the level of our collective stress, our fatigue, and our despair hits that exact same critical mark that was crossed on that hot July day in 1518. And when that happens, a quiet, rhythmic, grating music will play from the speakers of our devices. And we, just like Frau Trofea, will stand up from our seats, step out onto the neon-lit streets of modern cities, and take the first step in our final endless dance from which no one can ever return.